So Marvel's highly anticipated The Fantastic Four First Steps film has finally released in theaters, and I just got out of theaters from seeing this film on the big screen. So without further ado, guys, let's go over the positives, the negatives. Let's get into this movie review. Let's see what they have for us. Let's go. The Fantastic Four First Steps was directed by Matt Shakman, and in this film we see Mr. Fantastic, Invisible Woman, Human Torch, and The Thing face their most daunting challenge yet as they defend Earth from Galactus and Silver Surfer. So Marvel's first family is back on the big screen with an entirely new cast after a decade from not seeing these characters in theaters, and I couldn't be more excited to get into this film, to discuss this film, to talk about this film. So let's go ahead and start with my positives for The Fantastic Four First Steps. And for my first positive with this movie, I want to talk about Pedro Pascal, because he does a fantastic job inside of this movie as Reed Richards, the smartest man in the universe. And you could really feel that in his performance with this character. They made sure to really hone in on the fact that this is a doctor and this is a brilliant character, because through this entire film he is solving impossible to solve problems. He is saving the Earth and finding intelligent ways to deal with the stakes that are at hand. Now, out of all the Fantastic Four movies that I've dropped up to this point, this is definitely my favorite depiction of this character and of a lot of the other characters inside of this film. So let's go ahead and jump into the rest of the cast here. Moving on to Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm. Now, to be honest, this was my favorite character inside the entire movie. I think this was the most well-written character and the most well-displayed when it comes to the use of her powers inside of this film. As you may have seen in the trailer, Susan Storm is pregnant throughout this movie, so just dealing with the fact that Sue Storm is a mother while also being one of the main leaders for the first family, we get an amazing performance from Vanessa Kirby where she is strong and dependable, and I just loved everything about this character from start to finish throughout the entire film. This was easily the most fleshed out character in the entire film. They made sure to make her a badass here. She has great hero moments throughout this film, and yeah, Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm, best character in the film. Now let's move on to the rest of the cast for the first family, because Joseph Quinn as the Human Torch, I love the way he portrayed this character. It brought a brand new fresh take to this character where he may not be as misogynistic as past takes on this character. However, they still stay true to his character. He's still, you know, that same Johnny Storm that's always chasing women, and they made sure to make that a point throughout this movie. It even made for some hilarious scenes inside this film, and I also thought they did a great job in the costume department when it came to how this character looks and how he was designed and the things he wears when he's outside of his superhero suit. That was all fantastic. Now, for our final main addition to this team, of course, we got to talk about The Thing. Now, when it comes to the design of The Thing, of course, incredibly comic accurate, which I can definitely appreciate. And I like that we get a more lighter take on this character, because if you've watched the past, you know, Fantastic Four films that have released, they make this character very dark and depressing due to what he changes into once his powers come into effect. But they went with a different approach to this film, which I definitely appreciated. This is a more lighthearted one where he's more in touch with the people that he's protecting and they look up to him, and you know, there's nice quips between him and the civilians that he's walking around, and I thought all of that was great inside of this movie. Now let's move on to my next positive that I have with this film outside of the cast, and that would be the world design, because the world design here might be my favorite part of the entire film. This is set in a different universe than our typical Marvel 616 universe. Instead, this one is titled 828, and they go with a more retro feel for this entire movie from the ground up, and you can especially see this with the costume designs, but not just that, with the world design in general, from how New York looks inside of this movie, from the technology to the vehicles to the people. It all has that 80s retro, and I couldn't help but love it inside of this movie. I wish we got to see this, you know, involved in more Marvel movies, and I hope we get to see this more in the future for the Fantastic Four movies going forward inside of the MCU. Now, this entire movie as a whole is bright and vibrant, which I guess is just the theme for superhero movies releasing in the month of July this year. And I love how they designed the Fantastic Four's headquarters inside of this film. The Baxter building, it was done extremely accurate. It looks amazing inside and out, and I couldn't be more happy with how that turned out inside of this movie. Now, moving on to my next positive with this film, we got to talk about the score, because the score is full of energy inside of this movie. It amps up every single scene inside of this film, especially the action scenes. It got the crowd pumped up, it got the crowd going, and it just seemed to invest us in every single moment. So the composer for this movie, Michael Giacchino, deserves a round of applause for what he did with the score here. Now, moving on to my next positive with this film, you know we have to touch on the villains. Let's go ahead and start with Julia Garner playing the Silver Surfer. Now, of course, there was controversy leading up to this film due to the fact that they did gender swap the Silver Surfer character, but to be honest, when you watch it in this film play out in front of you, I think they did a fantastic job with this character, especially Julia Garner. She brings a fresh performance to the Silver Surfer, and one that's a bit more emotional in its performance, and it's not just, you know, this stone-faced Silver Surfer, maybe similar to how we've gotten in the past. Now, we get a cool backstory here. They managed to somewhat flesh out this character, which I definitely appreciated, and yeah, I learned more about this character than I've known in the past, so I'm glad that they included that inside of this film because the character depth was definitely needed here with the Silver Surfer character. Now, moving on to Galactus, played by Ralph Ineson. While he's not as fleshed out as the Silver Surfer character, which we'll talk about more later in this video, I still really enjoyed what we got here out of this character. His presence on screen is haunting, it's ominous, it's intimidating, and you can just feel the entire vibe change once he shows up inside of this movie. Now, it was cool to see him on the big screen finally after all this time. I believe this is his first appearance in a Marvel movie up to this point, and I definitely hope we get more out of this character in future films inside the MCU because Galactus has a lot of potential that is still yet to be fully realized. Now, moving on to my next positive with this film, and that would be the humor inside of this movie. Of course, they involve it in every single Marvel movie. It's kind of part of the brand now, is the humor in each film. No matter how dark the content matter gets, they make sure to throw some jokes in. Well, when it comes to the Fantastic Four movie, I will say that they were very tame with the humor inside of this movie, which surprised me. Don't get me wrong, it was definitely there. This is still a Marvel movie, but it was a lot more held back than it typically is. And outside of one particular moment, nothing really stood out in terms of them undercutting a serious event with a joke, as they've been heavily criticized from doing in their past films. Now, let's finish up this positive section with just some honorable mentions that I wanted to talk about, such as Kirby. Of course, we get to see this character inside the trailers. This is, of course, their little robot helper for the Fantastic Four. He kind of just hangs out in the building, helps them cook, helps them build stuff, makes them food, really does whatever they need him to do. And I thought this was just a great inclusion inside of this movie. He gets some laughs from the audience. He kind of eases the tension that is building constantly throughout this film. And I would love to see Kirby included more in the future inside of the Fantastic Four movies. Now, moving on to, you know, the final honorable mention that I wanted to talk about for my positive section, and that would just be their vehicle, okay? The Fantastic Four's vehicle inside of this movie, we got to see it in the trailer. Again, it's fantastic inside of this film, the way it operates, the way it functions, the way they get use out of it inside of this movie and include it into some action scenes. I thought it was brilliant. I love the design of it, that retro vibe. It almost reminds me of like a Back to the Future type of vehicle, which I definitely appreciated. Now, while I loved so much about this film, it is not a perfect movie. So let's go ahead and move over into my negatives for the Fantastic Four first steps. For my first negative with this film, I want to talk about the runtime of this movie. Now, while it's a nice speedy watch, you know, you get great pacing, great action scenes throughout this entire film. By the time you get to the end of this movie, sitting at an hour and 55 minutes, right under the 2-hour mark, you realize this movie just did not have enough time, and it needed more time to flush out our characters more because, as I stated, Sue Storm is the most fleshed out here. The rest of the Fantastic Four kind of falls to the side of Sue Storm, as she is just pushed to the forefront here. And when it comes to characters like the Thing, we really don't get that much development for this character whatsoever. In fact, the Thing is the least developed character inside this entire movie, and especially inside of this team, which was sad to see because after all the trailers, I got hyped up to see this character. Again, this is a fan favorite character, so I wish we got more out of the Thing here, but again, the runtime didn't allow for that, so we kind of just have to settle with Sue Storm getting all of the development inside of this movie. And that also goes for Reed Richards and the Human Torch. Now, while they did get more development than the Thing, it still is just way less than Sue Storm inside of this film. And that problem also carries over to our villains inside of this movie, because while Galactus was awesome, it was great to see him on the big screen finally after all this time, and I loved what we did get out of him inside of this film, it still felt like it wasn't enough. We could have got a lot more development out of Galactus, but instead he just kind of comes and goes. chose not to jump into spoilers, which we'll talk about more at the end of the video. But outside of the fact that he is a planet destroyer, you really don't know much about this character, his motivations, and what makes him tick, which I'm hoping we get to find out more of that in the future inside of the MCU. Now, I think overall, all of the problems with this movie can simply be summed down to the fact that this movie is under 2 hours and we got to keep the ball rolling, and we're trying to introduce all of these brand new characters that we're slightly familiar with from the past, but this is an entirely new cast with an entirely new take on these characters and the villains. And we really don't have time to relax a little, slow down a little, and let things really play out when it comes to a lot of the emotional scenes inside of this movie. So I think they could have left more scenes in this movie, left a little off the cutting block, and just gave us more of a runtime, you know, 2 hours 15 minutes, 2 hours 30 minutes. Either one of those would have gave us a lot more time required to really understand these characters at a deeper level, because for the most part, after watching this movie, some of this stuff definitely felt surface level. Now, with that being said, that was my negatives for this film. Let's go ahead and move into my overall review for the Fantastic Four First Steps. Look guys, the MCU is back. Okay, the MCU is definitely back with this movie. Any problems we've had in the past, a lot of them get resolved with this film. This film feels fresh, it feels new. We get a new take on these classic characters, which was definitely needed. We have interesting villains that could have been fleshed out more, but what we got was still very intriguing, very interesting. Sue Storm is brilliant inside of this film, but the rest of the Fantastic Four, while they were cool and you do get good moments out of them, they kind of fell to the wayside, which was sad to see for a Fantastic Four titled movie. The retro world design was a genius choice for this type of film and for these types of characters. World building was surprisingly deep for how low this runtime is, and while a lot of the stuff we got here was fantastic, a longer runtime could have paid off quite a lot here. The first act inside of this movie is great. It's a great way to introduce us back into these characters, back into this world. The second act of this movie is easily the best part of the entire film. You get an action sequence inside this movie right in the middle that is mind-blowing, maybe one of the best inside the entire MCU, and it's definitely what's going to stick with the audience once they're done watching this film. And then the third act is definitely the most lackluster act in the entire film, though I will say it was still a good, solid part of this movie. Now, with that being said, let's drop my official rating for this film. I would give the Fantastic Four First Steps a 9 out of 10. It gets the 9 out of 10. A great movie out of Marvel. I can't wait to see more of what they do with these characters in the future. I think they left a lot of room to grow here, which is definitely good. We can easily get one of the best trilogies inside the entire MCU if they do the second and third movie properly and correctly. And I would like to see the director Matt Shakman return to direct these sequels, because he did a fantastic job here. He did. And I enjoyed the take that we got inside of this film for the Fantastic Four. I think this is easily the best they've ever been done on the big screen, and it's going to be hard to top this in the future going forward, to be honest with you. Now, that right there was my non-spoiler review for this Fantastic Four First Steps movie. Make sure you click the timestamps at the bottom if you do not want to sit through the spoiler section, so you can watch me sign out this video. But if you've already seen this film, then sit tight, because we're going to jump into my spoiler section for the Fantastic Four First Steps. And for my first spoiler that I wanted to talk about with this movie, let's talk about Franklin Richards, okay? Because I've been sitting on it. I've been wanting to talk about this throughout the entire review, but we could finally speak on it now that we're in the spoiler section. So Franklin Richards, this was a fantastic character, you know? I've never enjoyed an infant, a baby inside of a movie more than I have with the character of Franklin Richards. They somehow managed to make Reed Richards and Sue Storm's child one of the best characters inside the entire movie. Now let's take a few steps back here and talk about his birth scene, because I think this was the best scene in the entire film. I mentioned it, hinted at it in my positive section, but now we could fully, you know, talk about this scene. So the Fantastic Four goes to meet Galactus. They realize it was a terrible idea while trying to negotiate with him, because the only thing that he will negotiate for is Franklin Richards, is their child inside of Sue Storm. So they obviously decide we're not going to do that. They make their best attempt to escape while the Silver Surfer is chasing them throughout space. Meanwhile, child throughout this entire scene. Sue Storm is going into labor. She's having a child in the most intense circumstances possible that no pregnant woman has ever had to go through in the history of pregnant women, and it was just so insane. It was captivating. You were locked into the screen the whole time, like, oh my god, how are they going to get out of this situation? What is going to happen with this child's birth? Will the baby be able to be born in these circumstances? So many questions that you have here, and they just keep you on your toes throughout this entire scene, and I loved every single second of it. I mean, it was amazing, it was fantastic, and it was easily the best scene in this entire film, as I stated before. Now, Franklin Richards, I love when they showcased his powers and his eyes went super blue, you know, at the very end of the movie where he saves his mother's life, saves Sue Storm's life, which, by the way, fantastic scene. This is what, you know, really solidified this character, really made her the standout for this movie. When Sue Storm was using those powers of her, those cosmic powers, and she's holding and pulling Galactus back with all her might, all her strength, pushing herself to a limit she's never been before. It was brilliant to see on the big screen. She pushed so far that it literally killed her. We literally watched Sue Storm die inside of this movie, and then you watch her son Franklin Richards revive her. It was a genius scene, and I can't wait to see more of what they do with this Sue Storm character in the future. This is one of my mains. If you play Marvel Rivals, this is one of my mains inside the game, is the Sue Storm character. So I loved seeing the Invisible Woman here inside of this movie really be brought to life by Vanessa Kirby's performance. She did a fantastic job. Now, I love that they remained accurate to Franklin Richards, because while I am not super well versed in the Fantastic Four comics, you know, I've done a little research online, of course, leading up to this movie and just throughout the years hearing about these characters, and I know that Franklin Richards is one of the most powerful characters inside of the entire Marvel universe. So I'm glad they kept that intact in this film. I'm glad they, you know, followed with that storyline here. We definitely needed that, and they could just do so much with this character in the future. Now let's jump into the post-credit scenes, because I've also been waiting to talk about this post-credit scene. This may be one of the best post-credit scenes we've ever got inside the entire MCU. I know I'm saying that a lot inside of this movie, but for a lot of these scenes, that just happens to be the case, because this post-credit scene, it skips 4 years, right? 4 years later, we get to see a 4-year-old Franklin Richards, so we're not going to have to wait, you know, a lifetime to see this character grow up. I'm glad about that. You know, he's a little kid here. I liked seeing Franklin Richards grow up a little bit. Sue Storm and him are having a nice little moment, and then she kind of realizes that something is off, okay? She starts walking, kind of looking around the corner. She feels some type of presence, some evil presence in the room with her, right? And what does it happen to be? None other than Dr. Doom. Now, you don't get to see the mask. You just see the back of him, you know, the green cape and the hood on. It was fantastic the way they sold this to you. He's sitting there playing with Franklin Richards. Very ominous scene. I love the way that they portrayed this and depicted this inside of this film, and it was just mind-blowing. It got a huge pop from the audience, which, by the way, this film got a huge round of applause inside my theater by the end of this movie, which it definitely deserved. And there was even one person who came to my theatrical showing who was literally like yelling, shouting, applauding extremely loud just at every single scene throughout this movie. To be honest, it was a little annoying. He was making the entire film about himself, which was a bit ignorant if we're going to be completely honest, but I'm glad to see how invested some people are in these characters, because I definitely share some of those sentiments. Now let's talk about the second post-credit scene here that we got, and really it has nothing on the first post-credit scene. I kind of wish they ended with the first one, right? I wish we got the first one as the second one, and maybe the second one as the first one, and I think that would have been a better order here, because nothing compares to that post-credit scene of Dr. Doom. Nothing compares to the hype that you get from that. But I will say the second post-credit scene that we did get, which was like the animated series version of the Fantastic Four, kind of a retro cartoon version of the characters that we got to see on the screen. It even looked like Vanessa Kirby, Pedro, Pascal, all the characters, you know, it looked just like them, but animated and on the small screen. I thought it was an enjoyable second post-credit scene, but like I said, nothing compared to the crazy, mind-blowing first post-credit scene that we got here for this film. Now, with that being said, guys, that's pretty much all the spoilers that I wanted to talk about for this film. You know, I feel like we went over everything, we addressed everything that I wanted to discuss here, so I hope you enjoyed the spoiler section for this video. I hope you enjoyed the review in general, because I had a great time making it. And with that being said, those are my thoughts on the Fantastic Four First Steps film. I'd love to know your thoughts on this film down in the comment section down below. If you don't know what we do new here on Demigod ENT, we do film, TV, and anime based content. So if you're interested in any of this type of content, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. I'll catch you in the next one, guys. Peace.